So that shows you that there are classified programs going on and that secrets can be kept. The skeptics argue that surely somebody would blow the whistle on something as incredible as an alien being kept on ice from a crash in Roswell. Well, I don't know. I think that the fear of government reprisal, military repercussion would be enough to keep many, many people from revealing what they know. And of course, since that happened back in the 1940s, pretty well every eyewitness, in fact, every eyewitness is now dead, and we have even some of the eyewitnesses, younger members of their families, are mostly passed on. So I don't think we're going to get any particular release. And as far as documents go, I don't see how having a meeting in a national press club is going to do anything. What those meetings do, however, as in the case of the case of Brouwer, General de Brouwer, recently, who was the investigator on the Belgian UFO reports and was recently in the media along with some other military witnesses, and are among those in Leslie Kean's book. They are giving testimony that there are some reputable witnesses who are seeing unusual things and reporting them as a matter of course, and we do have the documents available. Now, skeptics point out that military pilots, just like commercial pilots, make mistakes, and they can be mistaken about things they see too. However, these pilots are individuals whose perception we rely on every day for our lives, literally for our lives. And if they see something they cannot explain, even if they're making a mistake, that should be of concern, and there should be congressional investigations at the very least in the United States. If a pilot says he's seen a UFO and it's not a UFO, it's actually a sundog or something like that, you better believe that we should try and figure out why pilots are reporting sundogs as something unusual, because those things are very common. Why would pilots?
You would think that they'd seen them before in their years of being pilots. Sundog would be up. It's a sundog.
Yeah, exactly. You'd think that pilots with 10,000 hours of flying time would have a little bit better perceptive abilities. And yet I have spoken with pilots who have mistaken things in the sky because, they're busy in the air, they're under a lot of pressure, they're tired. But if they're seeing UFOs, I think it's something to pay attention to and something that should be studied by at least the FAA, if not Department of Transport themselves.
So all these individuals that are coming out to these press conferences, what do you think it is then?
What's going on?
What's your general... Like, all these individuals that are coming out and there's disclosure projects coming out with their...
The problem I have with the disclosure project in general is that true, you are getting these pilots and other individuals who have seen extraordinary things, and they're adding fuel to the fire that some unusual objects are being reported. At the same time, because there's a very, very broad brush which is painting these scenarios, among those are individuals with a little bit less of a reputation who are making statements as well, and they're really tainting the pot, unfortunately. It only takes a few drops of oil to destroy an entire cistern of fresh water. And so if people with poor reputations are coming forward at the same time as the pilots and some of the Air Force officers, that's a problem. And right now, there isn't a concerted effort to make sure there's no bad in with the good. Very recently, I think of one particular case, there was a prediction that on October 13th of this year, there would be a mass sighting of UFOs around the world. And this prediction was made by a former officer who worked in NORAD, who retired now, who said that he had received channeled information from aliens in a different galaxy or something like that, who had told him that they were going to start showing themselves and preparing the Earth for the new generation. and it absolutely nuts. And of course, there was no such invasion or display of UFOs across the Earth, and yet this person really did work for NORAD, had some fairly interesting credentials, and yet was making some really outlandish claims. So what? You have on the one hand, people seeing, metallic craft while they're flying their jet aircraft at 35,000 feet, and then you have people from NORAD making channeled predictions about aliens invading Earth. It's a problem. It's a really serious problem, and that's why the subject is tainted, and it's so difficult to get consensus, and so difficult to get scientists to pay attention, because there's less interest.
Now that was Stanley Fulham, and he was channeling. He was getting channeled. He wasn't the channel, but he was getting channeled information from the transcenders.
The transcenders.
The transcenders. Yeah. And when the stuff showed up in New York on October 13th, there was sightings. There was a bunch of them on YouTube. I'm sure you've seen them.
Right.
And he claimed, okay, that's I'm good to go. See, told you. But if I remember correctly, he originally said in multiple locations.
Right, multiple locations, and the thing in New York was, it was a cluster of balloons or something like that was seen during the day. It wasn't certainly anything anywhere near as spectacular as what was reported, and even I mentioned that there's a few reports in Canada every day. In the United States with 10 times the population, you could multiply that by 10, and there would be at least a couple of dozen, maybe 3 dozen reports in the United States on any one particular day. So the fact that there are some UFOs seen in New York isn't really a verification of what he claimed at all. Actually, he even had an easier out. If you go back and look at what he actually said, he tempered it with there may be a display of UFOs on that day. So, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Either way, the aliens were right.
Yep. Now, in one of your books, I wanted to ask you about that. The one that was, I Saw It Too. You put that out years ago. You had interviewed or had some cases of young children reporting different situations.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more.
Well, this was the book previous to the Big Book of UFOs, called I Saw It Too. The idea was that over the years, I've noticed that there were children, teenagers, youths who had also reported seeing the objects with the adults. They're in some cases parents or grandparents or other relatives, in other cases family, friends, at the same time. And in some cases, they were the only witnesses. And I thought it would be interesting to present to kids stories about kids who had seen UFOs and aliens, and that were supposedly factual, in the same way that we would publish a report about, or a book about cases seen by adults. Why not cases specifically by kids about kids? And so there's 18 stories in the book, illustrated by an anime artist, as a matter of fact, a manga artist. And they range from the saucers that were seen in Zimbabwe in 1994 by dozens and dozens of school children, investigated by John Mack and a number of other individuals, to the Delphos case of 1971, where a glowing ring was discovered in a farm field and investigated by researchers, to the Flatwoods monster, and going back to cases, going back an early possible Roswell connection back in 1945. So the idea was that there's cases reported by kids and told in the voice of kids, so that it can appeal to a different audience and different demographic than most UFO books.
Now that's awesome.
In this type of book, was there any case that stood out to you that you think was like really unusual?
Well, they're all particularly unusual. They're the one that really was strange to me. Well, I mean, there's the classic case back from in Texas, where in 1980. Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum had their grandson with them in the car when the diamond-shaped object, shooting lightning bolts into the ground, confronted them as they were driving along, and they watched as the diamond-shaped UFO was chased by helicopters and moved away. And then later, I think it was Vicki Cash started showing signs of radiation exposure, and she actually sued the government. Betty hired a lawyer and sued the government for pain and suffering caused by what was presumably an experimental vehicle that was flown too close to them. But the officials denied that they had any helicopters or secret craft in the area that night, so the case was lost. So if the government admitted it was not one of theirs, what the heck caused the effects that were actually experienced by the adults and of the small child that night? So there's some interesting cases out there. It's just a matter of delving into them and describing them in terms that people can appreciate.
Mm-hmm. In your other book, the one about abductions and aliens, what really is going on? What's your general outlook of the abduction phenomena?
Well, I had started getting individuals coming to me with abduction stories back in the 80s. I guess like most UFO investigators at the time, we didn't know what to think. We didn't know exactly how to approach the cases. So I first went to a clinical psychologist who actually used hypnosis as a matter of course in his studies and work with the police. I realized that there are a lot of charlatans out there, people who claim to be abduction investigators and stuff, and really all they had was maybe a course on hypnosis that they took through the mail or something like that. And my heart really went out to people with abduction stories, because they honestly were traumatized by something that they had experienced and needed some help. And it quickly dawned on me that UFO investigators were the least helpful and probably the least qualified to assist abductees, because at least a handful of the abductees who had come to me were having such severe problems in their lives, possibly as a result of the abduction, that they felt that they were being watched. They were very anxious that the aliens were coming for them. Their family lives were disruptive and so forth, that a few of them attempted suicide. In a couple of cases, some women who had come to me with abduction experiences and described abduction experiences, through working with the clinical psychologist, it was discovered that they had been victims of trauma, in one case sexual trauma. And these types of things are way beyond the purview of the average UFO investigator. So I really encourage abductees not to go through UFO investigators and researchers for this, but to seek help for their own safety by going through clinical psychologists.